Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome once again to the Manchester and North West Districts branch of IOSH. And once again, we've got another great presentation, part 3 of the 4 in the series by Rachel and Rebecca. Personally, watching these videos, I've watched them a couple of times, watched them back afterwards, and they've been really useful for my CPD, particularly on the self-awareness part of it. And I've also learned a few new tools that have been great on my day-to-day stuff. So here we go, part 3, and over to Rachel and Rebecca.
Thank you, Stuart. And welcome everyone. Good afternoon to our session today. We're going to be focusing on coaching conversations. What are they? What do they look like? How you can use them. We're also going to be using Mentimeter today, which is an interactive quiz type tool. So if you could get your phones out and type in mentimeter.com, and we'll pop the information into the chat and enter the code, then you'll be ready for the more interactive aspect of the presentation. So the thing to think about here really in terms of coaching is we're starting with listening. And many people don't actually listen, they're actually waiting to reply. So I'll just introduce myself first off. My name is Rebecca Stevens. I'm a business psychologist and a coach. My business Work Brighter I established back in 2011, and I work with business owners, with leaders, with teams, all about developing themselves, their people, and really focusing on engaging and performing organisations. That's the kind of thing I get up to. I'll hand over to Rachel, who's going to introduce herself before we go into the agenda for today.
Hi, I'm Rachel Valentine. I'm an executive coach, a consultant and a facilitator. I joined IOSH back in 2002, and I must admit every time I read that it still gives me a jolt. I qualified as an executive coach back in 2014, and within my coaching practice my focus is around leadership authenticity, the development of emotional intelligence and how that links to leadership resilience and overall well-being. And I've also got an interest in about how coaching can actually be used within organisations around improving true cultures of care and compassion, and how that can really help along with engagement and performance of their employees as well. So that's me.
Thanks, Rachel. And that probably starts to make sense why we've come together to present to you. And this webinar series is being all about how do we help you improve your personal impact as a health and safety champion. And when we started talking to Stuart last year about the webinar, it's kind of morphed really from what was going to be a one-off face-to-face event to what is now this online event, and we split it into 4 sections. We've completed 2 of those already, and we're going to be looking at coaching conversations today. They do stand alone, however, so if you just want to look at one webinar, you can. It will make sense. You don't have to see the whole sequence, but they do tie together, and together they will help you improve your personal impact. So we looked at self-awareness, we looked then at language and communication a couple of weeks ago, and in a couple of weeks we're going to be looking at behavioural modification tactics or behavioural change. In terms of today, we're going to look at what coaching is, what it isn't. We're going to take you through 3 key coaching skills: listening, questioning, self-awareness, and then we're going to look at coaching conversations. We're hoping to do a little bit of a role play at coaching conversations, but that will be a little dependent on timings, but will certainly help you understand what they look like, why they're useful to you, what conditions are required to make them work well, and how you can adopt a coaching approach. So hopefully at the end of today, our aim is that you can walk away with something very practical that you can be implementing tomorrow. In terms of a recap, for those of you who didn't make it, or for those of you who now 2 weeks ago seems forever, self-awareness, the first webinar, when we were looking at self-awareness, we had a look at the Johari window model of self-awareness. So how do we expand our knowledge of ourselves? We looked at the learning cycle and how we can use our experiences and reflect on those to learn better. And we also looked at feedback, how you do this, how it triggers, what it can trigger. And then we went 2 weeks ago, we then started looking at language and communication. So we looked at that internal, external dialogue, how that influences what you say. We also looked at personality and your communication styles. And you might remember we talked about transactional analysis. So we focused on ego states and how that influences what's going on for you. and also how you speak to people. And then finally, we also brought in authority and how that influences that communication.
So I guess,
hand over to Rachel.
Yeah. So just introducing what coaching means. It's probably started to sort of filter into most sort of areas now. So whereas sort of 5 or 10 years ago, coaching might have been kind of an infrequent term that you saw, it's probably filtering far more these days. So you'll see business coaches, life coaches, wellness coaches, executive coaches. So yes, the list goes on. And I guess what they're all based around is key bits which are part of some of these definitions that I've found. So it talks about a process that enables learning and development to occur, and thus some kind of change or performance to improve. And the second point is around unlocking a person's potential to maximize their own performance. It's helping them to learn rather than teach them. So there are key bits as part of a coaching approach, and that's about providing a space and providing an opportunity which enables another person's learning. And I think that's core to quite a lot of those kind of coaching approaches. So what we've found, whereas, a couple of years ago, people may be classed as business advisors, what they're now classed as is business coaches. So what they're able to do with, instead of going in and working with somebody and telling them this is what they're supposed to be doing, they go in there, they learn about the business, and they help support that person who's leading that business really get a grip of what that means in reality, what they want to occur, and then how they're going to enable to make that change happen. So it's very much about being a thinking partner in those kinds of conversations.
Thank you.
So what isn't it? So people can get mixed up with what coaching is and what it isn't, and how it links to mentoring and how it links to counselling. So hopefully this slide will sort of kind of differentiate where those three parts sort of fit together in its purest sense. Generally, people tend to use coaching and mentoring quite interchangeably, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that because they're both kind of present and moving towards a future focus. I guess what differentiates between mentoring and coaching is mentoring can be slightly more directive. So somebody who's had an experience of working through something, or somebody who may have had your role but is now in a more senior role, and they're helping you to consider what kind of skill sets you might need to move up into a similar role. So it can be slightly more directive when you're talking about mentoring, and it's used very much, I suppose, in that career development and that professional development arena. When we look at coaching, again, it should be far more client-led. So it's led by the person who is the coachee or the client. And what it is, it's around helping them open that space for reflection and that self-learning. And how that differs from counselling, again, is about the focus. So counselling might be very much based around looking at what those past events have been and potentially what impact those past events are having currently. But a lot of the work is around trying to resolve those past events and the feelings and emotions that are attached with that. So that's how those three kind of work in that space. So we're going to bring in...
What people think?
Yep.
Great. So we're going to go into Mentimeters. So if you can just share the slide there. So we want to just do a little bit of reflection. We're going to look at a word cloud to see what you all think. So why would coaching be useful in your role as a health and safety practitioner? So before we go any further, I think it's really helpful for us just to pause and think about actually this tool, because coaching is a tool, in your role as a health and safety practitioner. So we can really kind of build that context. So if you log into mentimeter.com and put in that code, it should be presenting that question to you. You can do this online if you prefer as well. And then we'll take a look at the results. I guess what might be interesting to share here, Rachel, briefly while we wait for people to respond, is to talk about your transition from a traditional health and safety practitioner into coaching. Why did you find it useful when you first discovered it?
I think what really attracted me to it is the core concept about enabling individual learning. So I started my career out as in health and safety management, health, safety, environmental management. And I suppose it was at a time where it felt very process and very procedural driven. So I did an awful lot of work, writing an awful lot of documents and policies and strategies. And I suppose I came to a point where I felt a disconnect between what we thought was safe systems of work and how they were actually being engaged with and adopted, out in the real world as such. And I guess the thing for me is what the coaching approach did initially was just say, it was part of that, how I designed my training programs, how I developed my, my development programs, which is about helping people really reflect in a space about why something might be, as opposed to being told. So helping people have their own journeys, make their own risk decisions, but helping them sort of with the aspects of that risk decision, but ultimately recognizing that decision about what people are going to do tends to lie with them, unless you are going to be, completely sort of controlling and commanding those situations.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's take a look at for other people. What it's looking at. I'll close voting, so hopefully it stops moving around. So we can see there communication coming out is really important. Development, to help people develop, which is what you're talking about there, Rachel. Helping people develop that understanding and engagement being the key. Getting people engaged in what they need to be doing. Anything else jumping out there for you, Rachel?
I think ownership. Particularly, I think that is, again, a core principle of the coaching, because as part of that kind of process, the ownership of change is the person who is being coached. They make the change. So I think that's a big one for me. Being more confident, and yeah, definitely. And I think that sometimes comes with having that understanding. So having those conversations and being able to really get to the why of what's going on, I think, gives you confidence in your understanding of a situation, but also then confidence in any sort of solutions about how things are managed going forward. Power of influence, convincing, comprehension. Yeah, there's some really good ones there. Clarity, one of my favorite words. Yeah, brilliant.
Okay. Well, shall we look back at the skills then?
So what do we think about when we're talking about coaching and mentoring skills? So as we say, if this is about enabling, self-learning of others and providing them that space, we need to move away from those kind of traditional control and command types of skills, which are based around telling people and instructing people of what to do. So that's very much about the push approach. It's very about solving somebody's problems for them. And what the coaching is trying to do is go to the other end of the spectrum and be very non-directive. So this is about encouraging and pulling people, so supporting people to find their own solutions to problems. Now, I guess the question is about, well, why? And the reason that we work in that kind of spectrum is that, people who, it's based on the process and the principles that we're all whole, we're all resourceful, we're all creative, we're all resilient, and we all have our own solutions. Just sometimes when we're in the thick of it, the noise just takes away our thinking space. So by working in these non-directive skills, so the ability to really listen to understand, be able to reflect on what's being said, and being able to feed that back via sort of summarizing statements and paraphrasing really widens the awareness for the person who's in that coaching role, the person being coached. And it enables them to really widen, their perspective and really get a wider understanding about actually what's going on in the reality of that. It helps them articulate how they're feeling about something. And by doing that, what you're enabling is a pathway for somebody to work from, this is actually feeling really challenging for me at the moment, to maybe consider, okay, well, what is it that's challenging? to what is it that's causing that challenge, to, okay, what else might be another option about how we can deal with that issue. So that's why we work very much in that non-directive space. Instead of saying, okay, I can see that you're finding this really challenging, but what you need to do is, because that really takes away that ability for that individual to take ownership of that challenge, but also take ownership about what they want to do about that challenge.
Well, I've opened the quiz up, so I'll share the screen because people have started, I can see people have started entering data on how they use these skills. So that's currently open. So if you have a reflection on those skills that Rachel's just been talking us through and indicate which ones you tend to use. Great to see listening to understand coming very high there. So yeah, just let people reflect on that. I think the thing that's been quite interesting for me when we've been discussing these particular set of skills is reflections around some of the government guidance coming out in the last few months and where that falls in each of these different types of instructions. So it's interesting to have that reflection. Oh. Okay, any thoughts? It's pretty stable now, so any thoughts you'd like to add to that, Rachel, in terms of what's coming out as that? But that top one very certainly is the one that people are using, listening to understand.
And I think that's really, it's really great to see. And as I think as we go through, it's probably, we're going to clarify what that means. You know, we would, I suppose, when you look at statistically, you know, what we say and how we listen, you know, and we would probably think that actually we listen most of the time. So you would expect that actually most of us are very good at it. Statistically, it's not always the case. And what we tend to look at is around that motivations about why are we listening, what are we listening for, and what our motivations are around that. So I've got a quite provocative slide coming up in a minute, which will go sort of underpin what some of that is about.
Right. Well, shall we move back to talking a bit more about these skills then?
Yeah, sure. So my slide. So my question to you around listening to understand is, are you really listening or are you just waiting to talk? So I want you to think about, how do you listen? And how do you know you're listening? So who do you listen to? When do you listen? Why do you listen? What do you listen for? And what are some of your main barriers or challenges you have to effective listening? And I'll give you about 2 minutes to think about some of those questions. Okay. So bearing in mind the answers to the questions, just given that to the reflection exercise, are you one of these? So these are taken from a book called Emotional Intelligence Activity Book by Lynn Dell. And what there is a description of certain types of actions with regard to how people listen and what their motivations are behind what they're listening for. So let's take the faker. So the faker might be doing all of those outward signs and nodding their heads that, yeah, that's really interesting. They might be giving eye contact, but the chances are that their mind is thinking about, I've got to pick the kids up for school. Oh my God, have I got anything in for tea? Hang on a minute, my phone's just gone. So that their actual thought processes and their presence is elsewhere. So even though they feel they're giving the outward signs that they're engaged in this conversation and that they're giving their full attention and are listening, the reality is that, you know, they're thinking about other things. Are you the interrupter? So these are people who don't allow the speaker to finish and don't ask clarifying questions or actually seek out any more information. They're just too busy concentrating on when they can get their words in. And sometimes that's, you know, really difficult for the other person who's speaking. So they can be the hijackers of conversations. They can take things off in a completely different format because actually what's being talked about isn't something that I'm interested in. I'm interested in this. I'm going to find a way of interrupting this conversation and moving this into a way, you know, that benefits me. The next one is around the intellectual or the logical listener. And these are listening, but what they're doing is that they're processing your words and what you're saying through their kind of internal filter system. So what they're trying to do and working really hard to do when they're listening to you is to think about your words, what you're saying, and trying to fit it into sort of their logical pattern of the world. So, you know, again, what that can cause is that what's actually being said is not always necessarily what's being heard. The happy hooker. Now, we probably all know one of these. And this is about waiting for something that's going to be said in a conversation that you think, gotcha. And this is about, so I suppose it was like giving an example of, I wasn't feeling very well last month, you know, I'm sure I got the flu and because I was feeling absolutely dreadful and this is blah, 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 blah. And what the happy hooker will do is say, it's funny, I had the flu. I had that 2 or 3 months ago and you can't believe what happened to me. I mean, I know you were saying it was really, really well, but absolutely, I just thought it was just the worst thing and I wasn't sure how it was going to go on. And again, it's a way of flipping that conversation and the focus of that conversation back onto them and from the original speaker. The rebuttal maker, and they're usually the ones that are waiting for a point in a conversation where they can think, I don't agree with that. And will find a way of interrupting to make sure that they get their point across. And finally, you've got an advice giver. And usually these are coming from a place of support. And this was around helping people. So we don't like seeing people struggling and we don't like seeing people in distress. So our natural sort of motivation is to support people and to help us. So this is where that kind of thing is, oh gosh, yes, I acknowledge what you're saying. If I was you, I would, or this is what you need to do. And although it's coming from a really pure sense of support, actually what it does is it's very disempowering for the person who's on the receiving end of that conversation because it doesn't give them the ability to actually learn. It's not giving them the space to articulate and work through what they need to do in that. So those are sort of some things that are in the mix about when we're listening to people and what our motivations are around doing that. And if any of those have kind of hit a bell for you, I'm not asking anybody to put their hands up and admit to this, but just kind of think about what context it's in and what it's most prevalent in. And you know, and why that might be. So what is active listening? So this is about paying attention to what's been said, paying attention to how it's been said, what the context that is, and also, very importantly, what's not being said. And what you're looking for is things that are aligned, things that come together. So if somebody's saying, look, I'm quite anxious, you know, you would look to see whether their body language is mirroring that or not. Or actually, I'm not anxious at all, but their body language is telling you something completely different. It's about withholding judgment. So not taking what somebody said and trying to fit that into your view of the world. It's about holding it in that space and being able to just work in that space with somebody else. It's about reflecting on what they've said and helping them reflect on what they've said and how they feel about that. Clarifying, so the ability to ask a question. And you know, and I suppose this fits in very well with summarizing. So there's certain words, again, we talked on that in previous sessions around, that can trigger. And I think why is a big one. So when you're clarifying things, and maybe a softer approach to do that is to kind of summarize back what you've heard to see whether actually that helps make that communication link and gives them awareness about what it is they're actually saying. And it's also about sharing. So it's a two-way process, coaching. And again, I suppose the good thing about it is it does take that authority out of the mix. The idea is that you are co-learners in that space whilst you're coaching. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca now, and she's going to go through questions.
Yeah, so it's important in that kind of clarifying space and really seeking to understand is to be asking great questions. And when you think about it, you know, children are always asking questions. I've got a very young niece and nephew, and they're always asking me questions like, why is the sky blue? Why is that over there? Why is, you know, why do trees drop their leaves in the winter? And some of the questions are kind of quite practical questions, and some are just, where did that come from? And they don't, you know, as an adult, we'll get a bit exasperated by all those questions they ask, and some of them don't even make sense, but that's because they're learning. And they realise, you know, as children, they're experimenting with information, they're looking to learn. So as adults, it's important not to forget that that's actually a really valuable habit for us as an adult. So really thinking about how do we discover something new? Questions, using good questions help us discover something new rather than just confirming something you already know. We've got this in propensity as humans to look for confirmation. We've got confirmation bias is what it's called, to look for something and go, can I confirm that theory I've got already? But actually using great questions helps you discover something new. It helps you get a different perspective on something that you might not have ever considered before, and keep that kind of open mindset. It does help you gain some clarification. So just really hearing, have I heard this correctly? And as Rachel was saying, often summarising what you've heard. So what I've heard is you say X, Y, Z in a summary, means that the person can go, oh yeah, that's what I meant, or no, that's not what I meant. So great clarification questions help. And questions help you resolve issues because it shows that you're open to discussion. You're part of that thinking partnership. It's not parent-child, if you remember us talking about kind of those ego states in the last webinar. It's actually, I'm here to understand, let's resolve this issue, let's find out where you're coming from, and let me share where I'm coming from, and let's talk about that. And very much it's about understanding each other, understanding people, to gain that wider understanding of what is going on here. There are 3 levels of questions really to think about. You'll be very familiar with some of this. Certainly those ones on the left, I would hope that looks very familiar. The who, what, where, why, when, or I think someone used to describe it to me as 5 wise men, the who, what, where, why, when, but you've also got how. They're open questions rather than closed questions. So a closed question is when an answer is yes or no. So it might be, did that happen, yes or no, which is fine because you need those sometimes. You need a closed question just to confirm things. But an open question enables you to gather more data and information than you had before. It's then important to not just stop there, to really think about what is underneath that, what is behind it. So that deeper level of thinking. What's the meaning? What's the feelings I'm hearing? What are their interests? So what do you think about that? What does that mean for you? What are the implications of it? What interests you about it? To try and get underneath the data. Or what you'll find is when you're having those conversations, you're staying in quite a fact-based conversation, and change does not start with is not achieved with just a fact-based conversation. You've got to get to the emotional piece as well. which means you've also then got to get really deep down into the attitudes and values of what's going on. So you need to seek to understand why they're feeling like that, why is it important to them, why does it concern them? And you may phrase that in different ways to what we've described there, but it's really getting down into those values, those drivers, those attitudes that then ultimately drive their behaviour. So you're having deeper conversations. So just a brief recap whilst we're talking about questions and language. Just remember what we talked about in terms of emotional triggers. So emotional triggers are words that might trigger a reaction in ourselves. So we had a lovely word cloud before, and we had things like should do something, must do something, those type of words that really kind of can get your back up. And we also talked about those which are social threats. I'm going to hand over to Rachel, who's going to take us through, as the TA expert here, going to take us through further into this TA model, because there's an additional part to it which we think is really valuable to bear in mind when you're having those conversations. And you'll remember she talked about parent, child and adult conversations, and how when they're complementary, they tend to work. When they're cross, they don't tend to work. And you end up with these frustrating conversations. We're then going to do a quiz after the next slide. So just to try and help you embed that knowledge, just to really take it to a practical level. So yeah, the quiz will be around the slide, so I'd suggest kind of paying attention now.
Okay, so this is just around motivations. And the original model, again, comes back from sort of transactional analysis, and it's about our life positions. So where do we feel in the world? And these are based around, I'm okay, you're okay, which is a really healthy position to be in. But what can happen is through our life challenges and how we perceive ourselves and how we fit in the world, there are three others which are very, very challenging sort of positions to be in. And that's I'm not okay and you are okay. I'm not okay and you're not okay. And I am okay, but you're not okay. So the reason I brought this up, and this isn't specifically necessary to do of going into the whole TA life scripts things, but this was actually built on by another guy called Davis. And what he did was he's actually transferred this model into look at how people associate with blame. So this is about the adoption and demonstration of associated attitudes, really. And the reason I'm bringing this up is depending on which state you feel you're going in is going to be very much drive the kind of language and the kind of position that you're going to take in that conversation. So when you're addressing poor behavior or you're addressing non-compliance, you know, where are you on this quadrant? So if you're going into that conversation with I'm okay, you're okay, then no one is to blame in that kind of scenario, and it's a healthy position to be in. But sometimes if we're not completely present in our conversations, we may go in different states. And I imagine it would be more along the line of I'm okay, but what on earth are you doing? Because you're not okay and you're not doing blah, 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 blah. So this is the reason I kind of brought this in, just to think about how this fits with what our motivations are to have these more difficult conversations, which life position are we in when we're having them, and what the response of that is going to really kind of be. So hopefully that gives a quick sort of awareness around what we class as the OK Corral. Again, if people want to look online around transactional analysis and what this looks like, there's lots of information on the web. Just type in OK Corral transactional analysis and you'll be bombarded with loads of stuff.
Shall we try and bring it to life for them with the quiz?
Great.
I think we've got time to do that. So move on. So again, we're still in the momentum. Okay. So hopefully you've all logged into you're still logged into the Mentimeter. These are timed responses. Don't worry, we're not going to do a leaderboard. So we won't see what you've responded. So yeah, if you join mentimeter.com, and what we're going to do is bring that model to life for you. So it's probably feeling a bit theoretical right now. So I'll show you what it really looks like for you. So did you even read that guidance before checking you could remove your mask? So what do you think it is? Did you even read that guidance before checking you could remove your mask? So imagine someone saying that to you. Want to comment on that before we move on, Rachel?
No, yeah, there's an implication, and again, I guess the way you're going into that is a real judgment. And you know, did you even read that guidance? So yeah, so you are to blame.
Very much you are to blame. Okay. So this one. I'm sorry, my guidance must not be clear if you thought you could remove your mask.
Yeah.
So I am to blame. So I'm sorry, my guidance must not be clear. So this is where you're blaming yourself in that.
Yeah. Great.
Let's take a look at the next one. Hopefully this is what this is enabling you to do, is to really kind of connect with what these mean and what they look like in practice. So obviously I need to be clear in my guidance about masks, and you need to make an effort to read it. So obviously I need to be clearer in my guidance about masks, and you need to make an effort to read it. So yeah, correctly spotted. We're both thinking we're both to blame there, going in with that position. So let's take a look at the last one and what that looks like in fact, and what it can look like in language terms. We should improve the guidance if it wasn't clear that masks should be worn at all times. So we should improve the guidance if it wasn't clear that masks should be worn at all times. What you might notice here is a less of an emotional reaction to that particular statement. A bit more neutral, a bit more adult if you remember if you were in the last webinar. So no one is to blame.
So just, it's the key words that were in there. So no one to blame. When we should improve the guidance implies that the fault lies with the guidance. The fault doesn't lie with what you have done or what I have done or what both of us have done. So just literally changing some words around and being able to rephrase something completely shifts what the tone of the message is and how people respond to that message.
Right. So we'll go back and look at coaching conversations. We might have time to quickly role play it, and then we'll wrap up the questions.
So why would you possibly have what makes coaching conversations useful? And for me, I suppose in how I see my role of a coach is around the clarity of the why. It's getting really down into what those root causes are, and not just about, like you say, the level of understanding at that point of I did this and that happened, but really kind of drilling down to that why, which can go right down into those kind of assumptions, those beliefs and those values that people can have around things. So I think when we've had some questions and answers in previous sessions, it tends to be my go-to place, which is why and how do you know? And that's the reason you can answer both of those questions is about using those coaching conversations to really drill down and really help you get a view of the world through somebody else's eyes. So it can enable your wider learning for you and understanding as a coach, as well as it can for the person who's also being coached. It's a two-way learning process for both of you. And actually, again, where I picked up with the word ownership, I think ownership is very much embedded in that coaching, because it's the person who's being coached that will take ownership of the actions to make that change. Therefore, if they're involved in actually suggesting those or creating those, it will lead to far greater sustainable changes. So they don't need to be reinforced as much as things that are just being told for people to do. But there are required conditions around this to make this effective. It has to be a safe space. And when I mean about a safe space, it's about bringing in a non-judgmental approach. It's about taking all your interference out of that space where possible. So some of the things we've picked up on about how we communicate with each other, what kind of motivations are we bringing in when we're having these more difficult conversations. So it should be a space where people are allowed to be free to express how they're feeling, how they're thinking. It's a free thinking space with a thinking partner with no judgments kind of attached to that. What we say is it's orientated towards future goals. So it's orientated towards improvements and what the future could look like, and not necessarily, and certainly not dwelling on the past, although looking at the past and assessing the past will help inform some of those solutions, but it's not about sort of reliving what's gone on over and over and over again. So it's about exploration into the future rather than seeking explanations for the past. And I think, again, that's where that separation is for blame. So when we're talking about what people have done, with the why coming in, that can be very much about, really seeking and the judgment led around why did somebody do that in the past. But for me, it's always about widening that clarity. So, are we role playing, or shall I just go through?
Yeah, happy to, if we keep it quick. I think it helps illustrate it, doesn't it?
Okay, so what we've got on that screen is how we might use a coaching approach to temper down a conversation I'm about to have with Rebecca. So, hi Rebecca, I need a word, and I could do with having it now.
Okay, if you have to, that's fine. I can put it in. I'm really busy, but yeah.
So am I, and I'm at the moment trying to follow up with why all the annual fire awareness training hasn't been done, and you're top of my list.
Yeah, I've just been really busy. I just haven't had time to do it.
So it isn't done?
No, I haven't had time to do it.
Okay, well, I've sent you 3 reminders up to now. I'm not sure what else I'm expected to do to make sure you get this done. I
could do it later. Things are quietening down in a couple of weeks. I guess I might be able to do it then.
Okay, so what are you going to do about it? How are you going to make sure it's going to happen?
I guess I could put it in my diary. Yeah. When does it need to be done by?
2 weeks ago.
It's not that urgent though, is it?
Yes, it's the annual fire training.
Okay. Well, I'll put it into the end of next week then if I have to.
Well, I think you need to do more than just put it in your diary. I think you need to put something in place that's going to make sure you get it done.
Okay, I'll put a reminder in. Feel free to send me another email next week to remind me.
Okay. So actually, Rebecca's responses to me were incredibly adult. Had somebody spoken to me like that, I'm not sure they would have been. So there is a different way of managing that conversation. So, hi Rebecca, have you got a minute?
Sure, Yeah, I'm really busy, but yeah, I can have a chat.
I'll keep it quick.
Okay.
So I'm just following up. We do the annual fire awareness training every year, and it's a requirement for everybody to do it. And I'm just sort of following up with a few people who've not managed to get through it yet. Are you all right to talk me through what progress you've managed to make with it? I know it's not finished, but have you made any progress?
No, it's slightly slipped off my agenda, if I'm honest. I think when I went to log in, I was having problems, but yes, sorry, it just slipped off my agenda. Okay,
so if you get your login sorted, you know, do you think it's feasible to get this done?
Yeah, I need to talk to IT probably and just fix that password issue, and then I can get in and get it done.
Okay. What timescale looks sort of reasonable for you at the moment?
When was it needed by?
I could get it. It would be really useful to get it done as soon as possible, but I understand, you know, you've got other deadlines as well. So how would 2 weeks feel?
How long is it?
It's only an hour, and you're able to break that down, so you can stop and start it, and it will, you know, record where your progress is, so you don't need to do it all in one go.
Okay, so I could just do it over, you know, maybe just do kind of 15 minutes, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning or something.
Yeah.
Do it like that and get the password sorted this week.
Okay.
Yeah, if that sounds okay.
So that feels doable?
Yeah, that'll be okay.
Perfect. Thanks for your time. I know you're busy. I'll let you get on.
No problems.
So how did the 2 different conversations feel for you, Rebecca?
So I felt very attacked in the first one. Yeah, I had to, felt very, for me, it felt like it might be my mum talking to me and telling me off for not doing something. Whereas the second one felt like we were in partnership getting something done that needed to be done at work and finding a way to do that.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that was just sort of showing how that the same end, well, you know, the same thing that we were trying to get achieved, but having and giving somebody the ability to be part of that decision making about how they were going to get that done, you know, would hope that they'd have a far better chance of it actually being delivered at that point as well. Mm. And it feels a lot nicer for the person having the conversation and the person receiving that conversation as well. So just finally, thinking about what we've gone through today and even bringing in some of the elements for the past couple of sessions, have a think about a recent situation where you've had to talk about or discuss any poor performance or any non-compliance or any conversations that you thought were going to be difficult. And just think about, how did you start the conversation? What was said and by whom? What was the outcome? And what learning have you had from these 3 sessions that might inform a change of approach for you? And again, I'll give you a couple of minutes if that's okay.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions, so we should probably move on, if that's okay, Rachel.
Yeah.
I just want a quick look. So in terms of, we're just going to wrap up now, really. In terms of what we've been looking at today, it's been about, you know, really about what coaching skills are, and hopefully really come away from an understanding of that listening, questioning, the impact of self in that, and what a good coaching conversation looks like. In terms of our next webinar, it's very much around behavioural modification, behavioural change, introducing you to some models which will be familiar, but how to apply them better, and then also some new stuff in this area as well in terms of behavioural change. So please do join us at that. It'd be great to see you then. And we'll open to questions.
And we had plenty of those questions as well, ladies. As always, we've had some really good engaging questions. Thanks for a great session again, Rebecca and Rachel. The webinar feedback, which is very important to us all, is open now for our attendees to fill in, so please do that. Very, very quickly, David Jenkins says, hello Rachel, can you recommend any coaching qualifications, please? Would you recommend the Coaching Academy, although the diploma is quite expensive? Thank you. I'm sure we won't be committing to anything. Other academies are available.
There's lots out there.
There is a lot, and I guess the thing is, it's looking about what you want to get from that coaching qualification. So if it is around, you know, the practicalities of the coaching skills and the real demonstration of those, you can get those from other courses that are not necessarily qualifications. And I guess, yeah, it's whether it is, and to what kind of depth do you want to have that. So I suppose when you think about being, you know, chartered health and safety practitioners, you have a grading about your, you know, your technical memberships, and I think it's the same in the coaching. All I would say is think down is what you wanting to get from that qualification.
Okay, thanks for that. Arthur Nicholas asks, in what coaching situations, if any, would you advocate push rather than pull?
So I suppose where I move further down the more directive approach is when I'm trying, if somebody feels stuck in a cycle. So you get into their space and then you're working with their focus and they're reflecting, and for whatever reason, they're just hitting the same barrier time and time and time again. And I guess what I would use, more of a push approach might be to bring some other learning in there. So I don't tend to go to the extremes of what you need to do is. What I tend to do is a bit more of a softer approach, which is around storytelling. So, you know, something that might be along the lines of, actually, when I think about this, I think there's somebody else I've worked with in the past and they did this and they tried that. So it's still not completely directive. It's more, it's putting stuff into the mix that's not been there before, but I'm not telling them that that's the solution that they should follow.
Thank you. Simon Rosser asks, how does this tally with the men are from Mars, women are from Venus school of thought about listening and responding, whereby the male wants to solve the problem, more of the pull approach?
I've not read that book, so
I have, but I would challenge it because it is quite generalistic in terms of personality traits and who has more listening personality traits. I think, yeah, it's coming back to what we talked about in last webinar about personality and really thinking about, you know, who's the person that you're talking to, what are their drivers, what are they likely to tune into, and what are your drivers, what is your personality taking you down. So you're stronger looking at personality than something like the men-women divide.
Okay. Hitesh asks, I am seeking to change my approach to health and safety, move away from old school methods. Are there any particular models of coaching which are suitable for a practitioner? I have heard about the GROW model. Are there any more?
The GROW model tends to be, as I say, the grounding that most people get trained in when they become a coach. There are some models that are offshoots from that, which is like T-GROW. And what I would suggest is that the use of those, again, is far more focused around what it is that's trying to be solved in that coaching practice. So no, my experience is when you say to somebody, hey, okay, what's your goals? You will get a lot of ers and ahs, because it's not something we spend the time getting real clarity around. So the T-GROW, I think, allows a bit more of that fluidity to explore about actually what it is you want to change. But yeah, the GROW model is great.
Yeah, thank you. Nicholas Jones, you assumed that we know what quotation TA ego states, close quotations. What does it mean?
We covered that in the last session. So we covered transactional analysis as a communication model, which talked about parent, adult, child. So that's what those ego states are.
Okay. My very own Manchester Claire Thompson asks, how best can you approach a conversation where the other person isn't okay, isn't working well, isn't performing?
Okay. My question to you is, how do you make that judgment that they're not okay? And then it's trying to get into the root of why they're not okay and what you might be able to do in that space to minimize that feeling. So I think sometimes when you feel you're being called into an office to have a word, there's already that implication that you're not okay, because it takes you back to being taken to a teacher's office, or it takes you back to being told off for something. So it's about, okay, you know you're going to get that response. Is there a way you could say, okay, do you fancy going and getting a coffee instead? So it's just thinking about those wider contexts about how we work with people. And if we know that there's going to be that challenge where they're going to feel in quite a vulnerable position, what can we do as that person to minimize that and make them feel safe in that space?
Okay. Final question. Do you find that the severity of a problem incident makes it harder to coach, especially if the situation is time sensitive?
Time is a big problem. Timing and coaching don't go well together. So if you think about, and again, a very simplistic example, the fire alarm's going off. I'm not going to coach you about whether you think you need to respond to it. I'm going to say the fire alarm's going off and we're going out.
Follow me.
Yeah. One of the downsides of coaching is it takes time.
Absolutely.
One of the upsides is that once that learning's happened, it's embedded and it will continue.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think Stuart just answered the last question and dealt with that, but we were asked, can we see this session again? The answer is yes. If you go to the IOSH YouTube channel and have a look through what's listed there, there are hundreds and hundreds of good snippets of health and safety training and webinars and all sorts of stuff, including this 4-part session from these two fantastic ladies. Stuart, can I hand back to you to close the session?
You most certainly can. Thank you everybody for joining us, especially those people who are across the water or wherever you are in the world. Hope you've enjoyed our webinars. And next time is going to be on the 1st of December. Christmas come early in many ways, because not only do you get the last webinar, but you get the benefit of watching all 4 in one go. There's an early Christmas present for you. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.